The metal jaws closed with a sound that echoed across the frozen wasteland, a sharp crack that made every predator in the hunting party freeze mid-step. Sergeant Lyra Dane's heart lurched, but her hand remained steady on her rifle. She'd heard that sound before on a dozen different worlds in a dozen different wars. A trap. Always a trap. Hold position, she whispered into her comm, her breath forming small clouds in the sub-zero air. Around her, 6 young Varkesh predators, each one barely past their molting season, crouched low in the snow. Their silver fur bristled, their 6 eyes wide with fear and adrenaline. But they held. They didn't charge forward. They didn't panic. Good, Lyra thought. They're learning. 3 months ago, these cubs would have bolted at the first sign of distress. 3 months ago, they would have run straight into whatever ambush waited in the ice fields ahead. 3 months ago, Lyra Dane had been assigned to train them, and she'd wondered if it was even possible to teach patience to creatures whose every instinct screamed hunt, kill, survive. But humans had learned patience the hard way. Across centuries of warfare, humanity had discovered that sometimes the strongest warrior wasn't the one who struck first. It was the one who struck smart. "Core," Lyra said quietly, her eyes scanning the ridge ahead where the trap had sprung. "Report." A smaller form detached from the group, moving with the fluid grace characteristic of his species. Core was the smallest of the cubs, his frame lean where the others were muscular, his movements careful where theirs were bold. The other Varkesh had mocked him for it during the first weeks of training. Now they watched him with something approaching respect. "The trap is 30 meters ahead," Core said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat standard. "I can see the pressure plate. Military grade. Probably Krell design." Lyra nodded slowly. The Krell, of course. The insectoid race had been pushing into this sector for weeks, testing defenses, probing for weakness. They were brilliant strategists, capable of complex ambushes. They'd wiped out entire battalions of Varkesh warriors who'd charged in with claws extended and tactics forgotten. "Can you see what's in the trap?" Lyra asked. There was a pause. Then Core's voice came back quieter. "Yes, Sergeant. It's Vex." A ripple of movement went through the hunting party. Vex was the largest of the cubs, the most aggressive, the self-appointed leader. He'd been scouting ahead when the trap had sprung. Now he was caught, and every instinct in the young Varkesh screamed to save their packmate. "I'm going in," growled Tan, the second largest cub, already tensing to spring forward. "You're staying put," Lyra said, her voice like iron. "That's exactly what they want. One trap catches one of you. The rest charge in to help. Then the real trap springs." She'd seen it before. On Kandra's station, a Krell ambush had used the same tactic against a company of human Marines. 30 good soldiers had died before someone had the presence of mind to stop the rescue attempts. The Krell were patient. They could wait days for prey to walk into their killing zones, but humans had learned to be more patient. "Core," Lyra said, making her decision. "With me. The rest of you establish a perimeter. Watch for movement on the ridge, in the ice caves, anywhere. If something moves, you call it out. You do not engage. Understood?" A chorus of reluctant acknowledgments came back. Lyra could feel their frustration, their desire to act, but she drilled discipline into them until it had become second nature, most of the time. She moved forward in a low crouch, Core shadowing her steps. The young Varkesh moved like smoke across the ice, his smaller frame allowing him to stay lower to the ground. Lyra had chosen him for this precisely because he thought before he acted, a rare trait among his kind. As they approached the trap, Lyra saw Vex clearly. The large cub was caught by his left foreleg, the metal jaws holding him fast. Blood stained the white snow around him. His eyes were wide with pain and rage, and he snarled as they approached. "Stay back," Vex hissed. "It's a trap." "We know," Lyra said calmly, scanning the surrounding terrain. Her helmet's sensors were picking up trace heat signatures along the ridge, at least a dozen Krell warriors waiting in the rocks, waiting for the rescue party to commit. "That's why we're not rescuing you?" Vex's eyes widened further. "What?" "We're springing their trap," Lyra said. She looked at Core. "You ready for this?" The small cub met her gaze, and for a moment Lyra saw something very human in those alien eyes. Determination mixed with fear, courage built on the foundation of trust. Core had learned more in 3 months than some soldiers learned in years. "One of us had to be the lure," Core said quietly. "That's what you taught us, Sergeant. Sometimes you have to give them what they expect to get what you need." Lyra felt a surge of pride. She nodded once. Then let's give them a show. She fired 3 shots into the air, the signal. Immediately, the rest of the hunting party began to panic, breaking formation and charging toward Vex's position, just as the Krell would expect. It looked chaotic, undisciplined, perfect prey behavior. The Krell took the bait. They erupted from their positions on the ridge. A chittering wave of armored bodies and plasma weapons, racing down to catch the cubs in a crossfire. It was a perfect ambush executed flawlessly. Except the cubs weren't where they were supposed to be. At the last second, they'd scattered sideways, diving into pre-positioned cover that Lyra had scouted hours ago. The Krell's plasma fire tore through empty air where their targets should have been, and in that moment of confusion, Kor moved. The small Varkesh had circled wide during the distraction, moving through a narrow ice channel that Lyra had marked on their approach. Now he emerged behind the Krell line exactly where he needed to be. He triggered the charges that Lyra had placed during their night reconnaissance. Human demolitions. Simple and devastating. The ridge collapsed. Half the Krell ambush party disappeared under tons of ice and rock. The survivors scattered, their perfect trap turned against them. The cubs emerged from cover, no longer prey but hunters, and finished what the avalanche had started. When the fighting was done, Lyra carefully disarmed the trap holding Vex and pulled him free. The large cub limped but was alive. He looked at her with new understanding in his eyes. You knew, he said. You knew they were there all along. Humans learned a long time ago, Lyra said, checking his wounds, that the best way to survive a trap is to know it's coming and turn it back on the enemy. The Krell thought they were hunting you, but you were hunting them. She looked at Kor, who was examining one of the fallen Krell warriors with clinical interest. The small cub had been the key to everything, patient, precise, willing to be the counter-lure while the others played their parts. Sometimes, Lyra continued, addressing all the cubs now, the smallest warrior wins the biggest battles. Not through strength, but through thinking 3 moves ahead. That's the human way. That's what I'm teaching you. Tan approached Kor, and instead of the mocking challenge Lyra might have expected weeks ago, the larger cub touched his head to Kor's in a gesture of respect. You were brave, Tan said simply. Kor's translator clicked quietly. I was taught well. As they made their way back to base, Vex limping but alive, the hunting party moved with new confidence. They'd learned something vital today, something that had taken humanity millennia to master. Strength wasn't just in claws and teeth and charging forward. Strength was in knowing when to wait, when to think, when to turn the enemy's trap into their own doom. The cubs were learning to fight like humans, and the Krell, Lyra thought with grim satisfaction, were going to regret ever testing them. The frozen wastes were silent again, save for the wind whistling through ice and stone. Somewhere in that wind was the sound of metal jaws closing on empty air, of perfect ambushes that found no prey, of predators who'd learned that sometimes the hunted were actually the hunters. Humanity had spread that lesson across the stars. Now the Varkesh cubs carried it forward.